I'm in favor as a long-run goal, not something achieved tomorrow, but something to keep our eye on, of trying to move to a condition where we eradicate race from social judgment.
Race is here, and what we do with it is completely up to us. I am of the belief that what we will not do is eliminate it.
You're either part of the journey for change, or you're part of a system that wants to keep the status quo.
Hello. We want to see the end of discrimination on the grounds of race. To this end, in 2018, France unanimously voted to remove the word race from its constitution, endorsing the view that race should play no part in any decision or action. Yet at the same time, many want to assert their right to be proud of their heritage and see race as a defining part of their identity. Should we be seeking to eradicate race from social judgments? And as a result, must we give up attachment to being part of any particular racial group? Or does ignoring race cover up historic injustices and disregard inherent differences in identity? Well, it's a fascinating and extremely timely debate, and I'm very glad to say that we've got three outstanding speakers to join us this evening. First, we have Professor Glenn Loury. He is the Merton P. Stoltz Professor at Brown University in the United States, but he was also the first African-American tenured professor of economics in the history of Harvard University back in 1982. Glenn's vehement criticism of affirmative action led to him becoming extremely well-known and highly regarded on the intellectual right from the 1980s onward. Then we have George Mpanga, who's better known to many as George the Poet, an award-winning podcaster, spoken word artist, and cultural critic. George first gained prominence as part of a new generation of spoken word artists challenging the traditionalism of poetry recital. And you can hear his podcast called Have You Heard George's Podcast on BBC Sounds. And Dawn Butler is Labour MP for Brent Central, and she served as Shadow Women and Equality Secretary and Shadow Minister for Diverse Communities. Now, in the traditional, if there is such a thing, traditional how the light gets in way, we're going to start by asking each of our speakers to give us up to 3 minutes in which they address a particular question. And the question to start us off with is, should we be seeking to eradicate race from social judgments? And I wonder if we could start with you, Glenn Loury. Over to you for 3 minutes.
Very well then. Let me be provocative. Yes, is my answer to that question. We should be seeking to eradicate race from social judgments. Now, I don't say that this will happen immediately. I don't say that we should pretend that race doesn't exist or that we should ignore the history of racial oppression, slavery, discrimination, and so on. But what should we be seeking to do as a society over the long run? We should be seeking to transcend racial categorization. These are ways of looking at ourselves which we inherit from the past. We need not be imprisoned by them. This is a conception of the person which at some level is superficial. It defines us in terms of the color of our skin, the texture of our hair, the shape of bones in our face. That's not who we are. That's our packaging. Now, I acknowledge that as a practical matter, given the conditions on the ground in many countries in the world, the legacies of racial oppression require redress. Effective redress cannot be accomplished without some kind of cognizance of racial identity. But that's the legacy of the past. We should be attempting to transcend it. If we believe in racial justice, if we genuinely believe in racial equality, the long-run solution to this problem is to subvert these categories altogether, to be miscegenation mongers, to marry across racial lines, to integrate our communities, to assimilate our values one to another across the racial divide. I think history gives us plenty of reason to expect that the society built on a foundation of transracial humanism is a more just and equal society than the many tribal societies that we see around the world today where conflict, inequality, and enmity fester. So I'm in favor as a long-run goal, not something achieved tomorrow, but something to keep our eye on, of trying to move to a condition where we eradicate race from social judgments.
Glenn Loury, thank you very much indeed for that very succinct and provocative opening statement. And we will turn immediately for the next statement to George the poet. Please, go ahead.
I don't think we should be seeking to eradicate race from our social judgments. The differences between us on a physical level are superficial. On a social level, they've been exploited to justify practices and social orders which are imbalanced. And unfortunately, that has shaped our present. Race is here. And what we do with it is completely up to us. I am of the belief that what we will not do is eliminate it. We will not erase it from the social memory, and we will not get any better at denying the reality of racism. We can only look to begin explaining how racism persists, and we can seek to undermine the mechanisms of racism. I envision a society in which we are all so well versed in our history, in the bits of our history that we can claw back, in the parts of our current existence that we can verify person to person. I look forward to a society in which our young people are versed on inequality. Our young people learn in school the mechanics of power and the persistence of social injustice. I anticipate this future and I see it as essential in providing an equal footing in which learners can leave the education process, enter the workforce, build healthy, happy, functional lives, productive lives in which they feel that the consequence of their work reflects the essence of who they are. And the only way that I believe this society can be reached is by digging into our inequalities, digging into the archives and understanding how the differences between us, geographic, superficial, physical, situational, and otherwise, have been manipulated, have been exploited to leave us living in conditions today in which racial inequality pervades every element of our existence. We should get better at talking about this. We should have formalized processes. We should have institutions that reflect this understanding, and we should be brave in passing the baton onto the generation following us, giving them the faith to believe that they can lead us to a better tomorrow. But we will not do that by pretending race does not exist.
Thank you very much indeed, George, and again, extremely concise, extremely potent and provocative in the right sort of way. Dawn, could I turn to you for our third opening statement? Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Rana, and thank you to both Glenn and George for those opening statements. And I agree with George. It will be utopia if race was not a part of the remarks, the actions in society. But the fact is this: race is a social construct, but racism is very much real and tangible and dangerous. The fact of the matter is that racism exists, discrimination exists, and biases exist. If we do not acknowledge it or measure it, we cannot take action on it. And to ignore race is to ignore the stories and journeys of each and every African, Caribbean, Asian, minority ethnic people and communities. And we have to accept and acknowledge the journeys. Biases has consequences. And if we do not recognize that, we cannot measure it and we cannot mitigate against it. And that is why we're going on this journey at the moment. It's very difficult at the moment for some. It's a very uncomfortable conversation for some. It's a very confronting and challenging conversation for some, but it's a necessary conversation. What surprises me that people are surprised. They're surprised at the lived experiences of people of color. And I often wonder, why are they surprised? It's because they live in a different world, in a different bubble where they are not subjected to everyday lived racism just because of the color of one's skin. So I will say, for those who try their best to pretend that they don't see color, they will often then fail to see the injustices that comes with being a person of colour. And if we're going to move beyond that, we have to just talk frankly about it.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.